I was angry that they dared to even place this in the hands of my 5-year-old son.
I never thought that my rights as a parent would be taken away from me.
They thought it was such an egregious situation, they did an emergency removal of this boy.
The heartbreak of moms and dads around the country is becoming universal.
Community groups have rallied on behalf of the family, saying parents should decide their children's medical treatment.
It's a parent's duty to control and direct the upbringing of their child.
If American parents knew, they would be horrified.
Objection overruled.
Parents across America are losing their parental rights. These aren't abusive or neglectful parents, but parents who love and protect their children. So why are good parents losing their rights?
The vast majority of parents and adults in general think that the normal, traditional rules of parents' rights are still in place, that parents get to make decisions for their children in areas of education, their upbringing, medical care, the whole gamut of parental decision-making.
The vast majority of Americans believe that moms and dads should be able to parent as they see fit. But what they don't understand is there's no legal right that allows them to do so.
The Supreme Court of the United States, throughout the history of the nation, has always treated that right of a parent to raise their child as what we call in the law fundamental.
When I realize and learn that something that I thought was a fundamental right is not a fundamental right, that is deeply troubling. When we surveyed last year in a Zogby poll over 2,000 people, over 90% of Americans agree with the definition of traditional parental rights, which is that we have the right to direct the upbringing and education of our children as we see fit.
93% of Americans really thought that that was a good idea politically. They're going to be surprised to learn what the courts are actually doing.
For the first time in American history, a majority of the Supreme Court no longer treats the parent's right to control and direct the upbringing of their child as a fundamental liberty.
The problem with explaining parents' rights to a person as compared to free speech rights, free speech, you say, go look in the First Amendment, there it is. But for parents' rights, there's no place to go look. You have to go read a bunch of Supreme Court decisions to see how they found it, what they've done to it in the meantime, and it's an evolving standard. That's the problem.
There are people each and every day who are scheming to take away parental rights to start to destroy the family structure.
We now have a new situation where government itself becomes the standard, and who's ever in power gets to say what your liberty is.
Without actual constitutional text, our basic parental rights can be completely written off in the hands of the wrong people, as you'll see in the following true stories.
I was sitting in my office in Nashville, and I got a call from a constituent named Sid Dartery. He was so mad, so aggravated, that he could hardly speak. He had taken his son to a physician because he was concerned about some medical issue relative to his son.
All right, Zach, I'm going to need you to take a couple of big breaths for me. Okay, nice and deep.
My son, he was just in a daze. We took him back to the doctor and I voiced concerns that maybe it was too much medication.
I just don't know, Doc. He complained about his head spinning, and the next thing I know, he's passed out on the floor.
Do you have any pain anywhere at all? Just here.
I'm an average father. I love my family. I love my wife. I love my children. I never thought that my rights as a parent would be taken away from me.
As a dad, I can relate to Sid. He simply wanted to know what was going on with his son.
He had been taking different medications. We were concerned that he was being over-medicated.
You know, Doc, he didn't start passing out until you upped the dosage on those medications you put him on.
I'm afraid this appears to be something else.
The doctor, during the course of the examination, decided that he should go ahead and drug test him. because some of the symptoms they saw were suggestive of possible drug use.
And he asked about doing a drug screen, and I said, yeah, that'll be fine.
I suggest you do a drug screen just to be sure.
I'm okay with that.
And he said, oh, by the way, I cannot get the medical records to my son without his permission because the law says so.
He has to give us permission for those results?
Children are entitled to medical privacy. We cannot release children's medical results to parents.
The doctor, quoting federal law, made it very clear that he could not release the results of the drug test to the parents.
You're saying
No, wait a minute.
I'm only following protocol.
I have to ask my 13-year-old for permission?
I'm just following federal guidelines. This is his right.
We're his parents. What about our rights?
We have the right to know if our son's health is in danger. Come on, son.
Let's go, Zach.
We're only following federal guidelines, Mrs. Doherty.
How could somebody tell me that the law says that a parent cannot get medical records of their minor child?
We paid for those drug tests.
It's not right. It's outrageous. It's offensive to think that that would go on.
Federal guidelines. That's not right.
Absolutely unreasonable. These
You
are
are
federal
being
guidelines that
unreasonable.
I have to obey.
You don't talk to him, doctor. You talk to me. And we, his mother and I, want those lab results.
I can't do that. The only way I can release that information is if your son gives me permission. It's the law.
Then the law is wrong, doctor.
There are people in America that would say this is just an isolated case. However, the physician was quoting federal law.
Sid Daughtry's case is not just an isolated story. It's happening in America every day, all around the country.
One thing that very much concerns me is the subtle way in which parental rights are being eroded.
What's amazing to me is the parents that I talk to just don't seem to believe that our country could be infringing upon the rights of families and parents as much as they are.
In the medical field, this happens frequently. And it's not just in the medical field, but this also happens in the area of educating our own children.
It was just another ordinary day with the exception of Daddy having the privilege of picking his little boy up from kindergarten. And he came running up to the door, and I went over to meet them.
Like I always do when I do pick him up, we just give all the materials to my wife, Tanya.
So Dave handed me Jake's things. I looked at what Jake had brought home. It wasn't just his book bag, it was also another book bag. What I read on the front of the book bag, I was a little perplexed by. I took Jake's belongings on into the kitchen, took a closer look at the additional thing that Jacob had brought home.
Tanya got into this book bag and called me over to show me what one of the books was.
Dave, where'd you get this?
Jake had it at school. Why?
Jake, honey, who gave this to you?
Miss Johnson. I'm realizing this material has somehow been deemed appropriate to even be placed in my 5-year-old's hands.
What in the world?
It was a book meant to introduce and normalize homosexuality.
This is about introducing to my child sexuality issues at a very early age.
And they teach this in kindergarten?
Even before he's introduced by his parents.
It's just a child, Dave.
I just could not believe that they were doing this in kindergarten.
And I was worried. I didn't know. I didn't know what other discussions had taken place.
What else are they doing in that school?
We decided to email the teacher.
Hey, Tanya, can you read this and tell me what you think?
Tanya and I thought it absolutely necessary to make it clear to the teachers and administrators of that school that it is our parental right to be able to be notified when they're doing this to our children and have the option to opt our children out.
Jake can't even tie his own shoes yet.
The principal agreed to meet with us the following Friday.
I think you're both misinformed. These school materials have nothing to do with homosexuality, but with family.
She basically directed us to a gay, lesbian, straight educational network workshop.
Go to this workshop.
That's entitled How and Why to Talk to Your Children About Diversity.
It'll get rid of any wrong preconceptions you have about what we're doing.
We did not know what we were getting into at this point. The evening came for the GLSEN workshop.
Thank you so much for coming tonight.
When the workshop leader came in the room, the first thing he said was,
I could talk to you about diversity, but tonight, I've decided to talk about homosexuality.
I don't want to discuss heterosexuality and homosexuality or the comparisons between the two at this early age, and they made it very clear that they've decided to introduce this to young children, and they were willing to do it behind the backs of parents and without opt-out.
Let me show you what's going to be happening around here over the next few weeks.
I was very worried. Not only was my mind racing, wondering what could possibly have already taken place and what their plans were to accelerate these discussions and presentations to our 5-year-old son.
We're going to be putting more educational materials like this in every classroom.
Indeed, this is now something they're going to be rolling out more and more. So after we fully understood what they planned to do with the children, we went to the principal.
I wanted to catch you before you leave and let you know that we've both decided that we still want Jake opted out of these lessons.
And we'd like to have parental notification in advance if something like this should come up again.
I'm afraid we can't do that.
They would not accommodate at all. We had one final meeting at Estabrook Elementary School with the principal and the director of education.
There's only 2 months left until school is over.
All we're asking is for you to make an exception for one child. Just one child.
All right. That sounds reasonable. I think we can do that.
Well, thank you.
We just need to speak to the superintendent. I think we can work something out.
When she told us that accommodation may be possible just for the end of the year, we were very happy.
So at that point, I left the meeting, and Dave continued to stay in the meeting.
And as I was sitting there, I thought, finally, we're getting some accommodation. Who are we talking about here? We're talking about my child. I'm not talking about the rest of the school. We didn't say never do this. We said when you do it, as they stated they would, notify us first, and we want the option to opt out if we don't think he's ready for that. What I didn't realize was they weren't actually taking that extra time to accommodate. They were formulating another plan. They were keeping me there by leaving me with this promise and calling the police.
It looks like we're getting somewhere.
Really?
See you there.
Yes, officer, that's him over there.
Mr. Parker, need to have a word with you.
When I saw the police come in, I thought to myself, I cannot believe they've done this to me.
You gotta be kidding me.
Getting arrested today is not gonna help your cause.
My only cause is to be a good father. I want my son opted out, and I'm not leaving here until they agree to do that.
When I was let out and put in the police car, I thought to myself, how far are they willing to go to deny us our parental rights? There needs to be some kind of protection of our parental rights.
Unbelievable.
Any form of authority which undermines the interaction and the guidance of a parent for their child has to be stopped. Parents need some form of protection because this type of thing is happening more and more and more.
If you think the David Parker case is an isolated incident, you try it. If you have a child in public school, you go down and make your voice be heard and see what happens.
There has been a slow degradation of parental rights. They have slowly dictated that they have more control within the schools than you do within the home.
The way this has come about is this idea that once a child is dropped off at a school, they enter the doors of that school, that then the parental rights evaporate. And that parent has no say over what their child will be taught, what their child will be exposed to.
What we've seen over the last 40 to 50 years is continual legislative and judicial overreach going into areas that we never thought they would reach into.
The government has a role, but it's not the role of a partner. It's the role of a backstop. If you abuse your kids, if you neglect your kids, and they have evidence of that, the government moves in, and they should move in those circumstances. But when they treat all of us as if we're child abusers, that's absolutely outrageous, and we can't stand for it.
Karl Marx said that in order to establish a perfect socialist state, you have to destroy the family. You have to substitute the government and its authority for parental authority in the rearing of children.
If this situation isn't bad enough, we now face an even greater threat to parental rights that will forever change the role of the family as we know it. This new challenge comes in the form of an international treaty called the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, also known as the UNCRC or the CRC.
On November 20, 1989, the United Nations adopted the Convention of the Rights of the Child, the CRC. The treaty was designed with 4 core principles in mind: non-discrimination, the best interest of the child, rights to life, survival and development, and respect for the views of children.
It is frustrating that the U.S. is the only country that has not approved this, and we certainly hope that progress can soon be made.
At first glance, the UNCRC appears to promote the rights of children. Interestingly, the USA is the only country that hasn't ratified the treaty. So what's holding us back?
Some people think there is nothing wrong with the treaty because it is there supposedly to protect children. But there are parts of the treaty that are very, very dangerous. For example, one says that any government action involving children and parents must be made in the best interest of the child. The second provision says that a child's view should be taken into consideration side by side with a parent's, and that the child's view should be given due consideration. And this is especially true as the child gets older. What this means is anytime there's a conflict or a dispute between a child and the parent, a government bureaucrat gets to decide what is in the best interest of the child instead of the parent deciding what is in the best interest of the child.
One of the things the Convention on the Rights of the Child states is that children have the right to access any media or any information that they want. It also means that a predator has the ability to access children through the internet, and that parents have no right to protect their children. So this treaty that purports to give rights to children really makes children more vulnerable to being exploited and abused.
The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child is composed of 18 experts from all over the world. One of them is from Uganda. Uganda, in the last year or two, has a bill in its legislature where they're trying to decide whether honor killings should be against the law. An honor killing is a girl gets raped, and to bring back honor to the family, they kill the girl. That's clearly against the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, yet they've got a person sitting on this committee whose country can't make up its mind whether or not honor killings are acceptable.
This is not a convention on the rights of the child. This is a convention on the stripping of rights from American parents and parents all over the globe.
Let's look at some of the countries that have adopted the UNCRC. In Holland, children start sex education at age 4. In Sweden, homeschooling is illegal. Do it and you'll face criminal charges and risk having your child removed from your home. In Belgium, doctors can terminate the lives of babies under a year old if they feel the child is somehow disabled or deficient. In 16% of cases, they didn't even ask for the parents' consent.
A fit, loving parent who cares for their children is now put in the same position as an unfit, abusive parent under the provisions of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child.
The convention is sufficiently vague, gives sufficient power to government, and could be misinterpreted by judicial bodies to interfere with parents and their parental rights.
And even if the UNCRC does not get ratified by the US Senate in the near term, a clear trend is emerging that should greatly concern parents. Federal courts in the United States are increasingly using international sources to guide their decisions, applying what's known as customary international law. This is all happening largely under the radar and helps advance the objectives of the UNCRC.
What they can't get the American people to agree to, they can pass in piecemeal form through state legislatures. They can take an article that's incorporated into the wording of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, lift that article out, make a law around that article, pass it through a state legislature, and by doing this 20 times, in effect, such and such a state now has as its law the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child.
In our court system today, the customary international law says, we're going to not only consider U.S. law, but we're also going to take into account international law. There have been cases where judges have brought into their decision-making customary international law as modifying their interpretation of how U.S. law ought to be applied.
If you want to have a perfect example of how the Convention on the Rights of the Child would be implemented in the United States, Washington State did an experiment for us in the 1980s by passing a state law that contained the core provisions of the treaty. The Best Interest of the Child standard was enacted, as well as the child's wishes must be adhered to standard. There was a 13-year-old boy who had been counseled by officials who came and explained to him the new children's rights provisions of the law in the public schools. And thinking about that new law, he went to his public school counselor and said, I don't like the fact that my parents take me to church 3 times a week.
I'm tired of them telling me what to do.
It was a regular church. There wasn't anything unusual about the church. The counselor was outraged that a 13-year-old boy would have to go to church that often. So she called in the social workers.
Doesn't the law say parents should listen to their kids or something?
The law does say that. This is a definite problem.
It was Friday, and they thought it was such an egregious situation, they did an emergency removal of this boy. You're not supposed to do an emergency removal of a child in this kind of a case unless there's clear and present danger of some real harm. Well, it's Friday, and Sunday is coming. He's got to have to go to church twice. So they did the emergency removal.
This is Eric.
Hi, Eric. We're going to take a short vacation from your parents, so why don't you gather your things and come with me?
I didn't ask to leave them.
The social workers actually just took the child directly from the school and put him in foster care for the weekend. They just made the decision themselves. They didn't go to court, they didn't get the police, they didn't get the parents' permission, they just did it. And then they notified the parents afterwards that they had removed the boy. The family found out your son's in foster care because of church attendance. When you do that, you have to give the family a quick hearing. So the following Tuesday, they gave the family a hearing. I was the lawyer for the family. I was a young lawyer in Washington State. Since it's a juvenile court, everything is closed. You don't have very many people in the courtroom. It's just the court reporter and the judge and the bailiff.
All rise.
There was the judge who was probably getting close to retirement age. The prosecutor was there, and I'm this brand new young lawyer doing this case for this family.
Mrs. Batelli, I see from the file that the department took custody of Eric on Friday because of a serious dispute over the parents' failure to follow the boy's wishes concerning church attendance. The department further alleges that this is not in Eric's best interest. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor. That's it.
Are they serious? That's it?
With that said, then, let's proceed.
On Friday afternoon, CPS took Eric Cooper in their custody without giving his parents any notification. This boy was taken without any proof his parents had harmed him, and that's what due process of the law requires. Not only is this a due process violation, but it is an unconstitutional invasion of parental rights as established by the Supreme Court.
My young opponent may rely on some old cases, but the controlling authority are the new statutes in the state of Washington, which require that the child's wishes be consulted in all matters concerning his welfare, and that the best interests of the child be the controlling principle. That is what we are here for today. Not for parents' rights, but so that you may decide what you believe to be in the best interest of this child in light of his desires and his wishes. Eric believes that his parents are imposing their religion upon him in an excessive manner. Listening to the child is almost always in the best interest of any child of this age, especially when it comes to things like religion. Too much church is not in Eric's best interest. It may lead to depression and other serious, tangible harm if we do not listen.
Your Honor, since when is church attendance considered to be harmful? Yes, the legislature passed this new law, but nowhere does it say that the CPS has the right to take over decisions on church attendance. The CPS is way outside of their jurisdiction here. This is a parent's choice. That is the law.
That may have been the law, Your Honor, but the new law clearly states that the parent needs to adhere to the child's wishes, and the defendant's wishes are in direct conflict with my client's wishes.
The mom and dad were obviously very nervous, very upset, scared. The judge listened to both sides, but it's pretty obvious he is fairly irritated.
So, you have no choice?
No, I don't. They make me go with them to church 3 times a week.
And this makes you feel isolated and depressed?
Objection, Your Honor. Pleading.
Objection overruled. Proceed.
Eric, you can answer the question.
Yeah, sometimes, I guess.
Did Eric ever show any signs of depression whenever you took him to church?
Depression? No. Why am I being punished for doing what I know is best for my child? How dare they do this to our family?
So we had a half day of trial testimony, and then we took a lunch break. When the judge came out to give his decision after lunch, my head said we should win this case easily.
All rise.
Because of parents' rights and basic principles of law.
Please be seated.
I thought we should win. I thought it was pretty straightforward. If you ever wanted to see a perfect example of how the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child would work in this country, what the judge said is absolutely classic. As soon as he started talking, I knew we were in trouble.
So, I think once a week church attendance is sufficient for a 13-year-old boy.
Those words I can still hear ringing in my ears. Once a week is enough church for any 13-year-old boy.
You really need to start listening to the wishes of your son.
Unbelievable. But then he started explaining his reasons. And his reasons were Washington State's new law, which is exactly the same as the core provisions of the Convention on the Rights of the Child.
If you disagree with the ruling of this court, Child Protective Services will retain custody of your son. Is that clear? All right. So be it.
This family lost the ability to decide how often their son would go to church because of the best interest of the child standard. That's at the heart of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that's exactly how it would work in the United States.
To determine that child can't go to church. Now, if I'm in a cult and, the child is getting hurt while I'm, participating in activities in that cult, then I think that the government should step in.
You don't really want anyone to interfere with, what you believe is right for you and your family.
If I'm doing the job and the county's not taking my kid away, what business do they have telling me what to do with my kid?
I think the parent has the right to decide what's best for the child.
And I think this should be governed by U.S. law and really by state law, not by an international treaty that's subject to all kinds of different interpretations.
I don't think it's really fair for a parent not to be able to intervene on decisions that their kids make that might not be suitable both for the child and the family.
The 2 core principles of this Washington state law are almost word for word the core principles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Washington state subsequently changed them because of so many bad cases like this one. We don't have to guess how this treaty would work. We know how it will work, and it's terrible.
The U.S. government should not be in the business of giving these rights in this latitude to the UN, an organization that only too recently had Libya as the chair of the Human Rights Commission. Give me a break.
The rest of the world doesn't treat treaties the way we do. They're just making political promises. Our supremacy clause says that a treaty becomes a part of the supreme law of the land. It overrides state laws, it overrides state constitutions. Almost all American law on parents and kids is state law. So this treaty would become supreme over virtually all American law on parents and children.
The reality is that these international bodies would not just be providing guidance, their opinions would be used to overrule our federal statutes.
President Clinton, during his administration, approved this treaty. So all that is left for the Convention on the Rights of the Child Treaty to be part of the supreme law of the land is for 2/3 of the United States Senate to say we want it to be so.
When government is given essentially unlimited power, the system that was created to supposedly protect children can easily become the very perpetrator of harm. The question remains, how do we turn the tide?
If we're going to protect parents' rights once and for all, we've got to put it into the text of the Constitution itself.
This generation has to fight to preserve and protect parents' rights in the Constitution of the United States so that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren can have the protections they need to be successful.
The Parental Rights Amendment is an effort to put the traditional legal standards of parents get to make decisions for their kids into the actual text of the Constitution. There are 3 sections that do 3 simple things. The first section says parents have the fundamental right to make decisions for their kids. The second section says if the government's going to try to invade your rights, they've got to have clear evidence to do so. And the third section says international law, stay out. The Parents' Rights Amendment has as many applications as the government has tentacles. Whenever the government says we're going to make the decision for you with the Parents' Rights Amendment, you say no. We'll make that decision as a family.
The Parental Rights Amendment is really the last bulwark against the implementation of socialism in America.
Prior to the 2010 election, there were about 150 co-sponsors of the Parents' Rights Amendment. More Republicans than Democrats, but still it was bipartisan. That's changing. We're seeing more support now.
I had an opportunity to actually sponsor the Parental Rights Amendment in the Florida Senate. And the reason I did that is because parental rights are an important issue that must be enshrined in our United States Constitution.
Parental rights is not a right-wing movement. It is not a left-wing movement. It is the correct movement.
There's a single organization who is dedicated to protect parental rights in America. They're called parentalrights.org. They're working to amend the U.S. Constitution to include rights for parents and to restrict the government from interfering with how you raise your children.
It's an organization that was founded specifically to do this one thing, which is to pass a parental rights amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
I am a mother, and I'm not a political activist. As a parent, I could lose my rights to raise my children. That has led me to become involved. A group of us have joined together, just moms and dads, to speak to our legislators and to get support from them and to get support from friends, family, and anybody else that we can.
If you won't get involved in protecting your families, what's it going to take?
Before society shifts, before it changes its opinion any further, because you can't pass a constitutional amendment unless the American public really is on board. They're on board today. I don't think it's going to last.
That's why it's so critical to get out in front of this issue, to pass a parental rights amendment right now while we do have a majority. It may be a silent majority, but it's a majority that we have to mobilize to get engaged.
I think that it's important for parents to understand that they might think, well, I'm just a mom or I'm just a dad and I'm busy but this is too important of an issue.
We have to ask ourselves the question, what are our parental rights worth to us? How much are we willing to sacrifice? How much are we willing to invest to make sure that today and for the future, those rights that we hold so dear, so that we can direct the upbringing and education and raising our kids how we see fit? How much is that worth to us?
Today, tens of thousands of parents across America are joining the fight to protect our parental rights. If you want to protect your rights and the rights of other law-abiding parents from being overruled, then join us by signing the petition in support of the Parental Rights Amendment, which you will find on our website. Once you've signed the petition, There are many other ways you can help. Tell others about the amendment. Write your local paper and contact your congressman. You can also make a difference by giving financially to parentalrights.org, as their work depends entirely on donations from people like you. Contact parentalrights.org to find out how you can help. Do it now. Protect your children by protecting your parental rights.